The air at Arlington National Cemetery that day carried the weight of silence, the kind that presses down on your chest until you feel smaller just for breathing. The rows of endless white headstones stretched in perfect symmetry across the rolling green lawns, each one a quiet testimony to someone who had once lived, fought, and died, though most of their stories would never be told in classrooms or movies. And at the very heart of it all, at the plaza of the tomb of the unknown soldier, stood the sentinel, a figure of precision and devotion, moving with mechanical grace along the worn path of marble. His shoes struck the ground with a rhythm so exact that it seemed time itself was keeping pace with him, a steady cadence of respect carved into eternity. His uniform was flawless, creases sharp, brass gleaming. Rifle carried with reverence, his eyes fixed forward, though they saw everything. The gathered crowd kept their respectful hush, cameras lowered. Children quieted by parents who understood instinctively that this was not just a tourist stop, but a sacred place, one where laughter and chatter had no rightful home. But not everyone felt that weight. At the back of the group, slouching against the rail with an air of practiced indifference, stood a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16. Her phone clutched in her manicured hand. Beside her, two friends shifted and whispered, one chewing gum, the other smirking as if none of it mattered. The girl rolled her eyes as the sentinel clicked his heel, pivoted, and began his measured stride once more. She raised her phone, zoomed in, and whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "Oh my God, he's literally just walking back and forth. This is so dumb. He's just playing dress-up with a gun." Her friends stifled laughs, one muttering, "It's like a video game NPC," and the other nudging her to record. But the girl wasn't done. Her voice rose slightly, carrying across the marble as if daring someone to correct her. "Look at him," she scoffed. "Bet he's just a failed soldier who couldn't cut it anywhere else. Now he's stuck standing here like a statue. What a joke." The words sliced through the quiet like a blade. Veterans in the crowd stiffened, their jaws tightening. A man in a wheelchair wearing a faded Vietnam cap shook his head slowly, muttering something too soft to catch. A mother pulled her child closer, casting a glare at the girl. But she didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She grinned at her friends, proud of her little rebellion. Then came the sound. The sentinel's heel struck the stone with a crisp finality, louder, sharper. He pivoted with razor precision, rifle snapping into alignment, and though his gaze remained rigid and disciplined, his voice rang out across the plaza with the weight of command. "Ma'am," he said, every syllable clipped, steady. "Carrying decades of tradition, you will remain silent and respectful at the tomb of the unknown soldier." The crowd froze. The words seemed to hang in the air like thunder after a strike. The teenage girl blinked, caught like a child with her hand in the cookie jar, though pride quickly forced her lips into a defiant smirk. "Sorry," she muttered, the word lacking sincerity, and then, lowering her voice but not enough to escape notice, she whispered to her friends, "What's his problem? It's not like anyone here can hear me." For a moment, the sentinel resumed his path, steps echoing, rifle gleaming. But then he stopped again, and this time he turned, not just with the mechanical grace of ritual, but with intention. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unyielding, the kind of stare that could strip a soul bare. The plaza seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, but it carried farther, as if even the stones beneath their feet were listening. "Do you know why I stand here?" he asked. The girl's mouth opened, her bravado faltering. Because it's your job," she said, half mocking, half unsure. The sentinel's jaw didn't move, but his voice came like iron. "I stand here because beneath this stone lies the body of a soldier who has no name. A man perhaps no older than you who left his home, his family, and his future, to fight for a country that might never know his face. He gave everything, and in return, he was lost so completely that not even his name survived. His family had no grave to visit. His brothers had no body to carry home. He rests here, honored by a nation that could never repay him. I guard him every hour of every day, in rain, in snow, in blistering heat, because his sacrifice demands perfection." The crowd was silent, riveted. The veterans stood taller, nodding slowly, some with wet eyes. The girl shifted, her fingers tightening on her phone. The guard stepped forward once, not breaking formation, but letting his words fall heavier. You call me a failed soldier? I have marched in deserts where the sun burned the skin from our backs. I have carried men bleeding out in my arms and whispered promises I could not keep. I have seen fear in eyes that would never open again. I bled, I fought, I stood when my body wanted to collapse. And when I came home, I chose this duty not because it is easy, but because it is sacred. Do you understand that word, sacred? It means there is nothing higher, nothing worth mocking. His voice didn't waver, but beneath its discipline was something raw, something that made the girl's stomach twist. Do you know how long we trained for this post? Hours to perfect a single turn? Days to polish brass until it gleams without flaw? Nights spent marching in silence, mastering a rhythm that will not falter even when thunder cracks or bullets fall. Every second here is a promise. Promise that the unknown will never again be alone. The girl swallowed hard, heat rushing to her face. She had thought it funny, harmless, to poke at something she didn't understand. But now she felt small, smaller than she ever had, like a child scolded by a father who had lived 1,000 lifetimes of pain she couldn't imagine. The sentinel's voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. One day you will understand that freedom is not free. It is purchased with blood, often by those whose names you will never know. When you stand at their grave, you do not laugh, you do not mock, you bow your head, because you are standing on the shoulders of giants who gave more than you could ever repay. Silence wrapped the plaza like a shroud. The girl's friends stared at her, wide-eyed, all trace of humor gone. One whispered, "Dude, stop," but it was too late for saving face. The girl's chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her gaze toward the tomb, the white stone standing silent, eternal. For the first time, she noticed how stark it was, how heavy, how final. She thought of her brother back home playing video games, of her father working long hours, of her mother fretting about grades and college applications. None of them had ever faced what the sentinel described. None of them had ever been asked to give their lives for strangers. She felt ashamed. The word failed echoing back at her, but now turned inward. She was the one who had failed, not him. Resumed his march without another word, steps striking marble in eternal rhythm, the rifle gleaming as though it too bore witness to her shame. The crowd began to disperse slowly, quietly, some nodding to the sentinel, others wiping tears. The man in the wheelchair raised a trembling hand in salute, his eyes glistening. The girl remained, rooted to the spot. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to say she hadn't known. But the words stuck in her throat, caught between pride and regret. Instead, she lowered her phone and tucked it into her pocket, her hands suddenly empty. Her friends tugged at her arm, urging her to leave, but she shook her head. Something in her demanded she stay just a little longer, as if leaving now would make the shame permanent. So she lingered, watching the guard march, back and forth, never faltering, and for the first time, she understood. She leaned against the railing, whispered softly, "I'm sorry," though no one heard it, perhaps except the marble itself. The sentinel did not look at her again. He didn't need to. His silence was its own answer, his march its own sermon, his presence its own rebuke and its own lesson. She left later that day with her friends, but the moment clung to her like a shadow. She replayed his words in her head on the ride home, on the walk to her bedroom, even as she tried to scroll through her phone to forget. But she couldn't forget. Years later, she would tell the story differently. She would say she once made a fool of herself at Arlington, that a guard had spoken to her in a voice so steady it shook her that she had cried without meaning to. She would say it was the day she first understood sacrifice, respect, and silence. And when she heard others mock what they didn't understand, she would hear his words again, sharper than any lecture, stronger than any book. Because once, at the tomb of the unknown soldier, she had mocked a guard, called him a failed soldier, and he had taught her the truth. She would never forget it. And the sentinel, his march continues still, unbroken, unyielding, guarding the nameless dead through sun, storm, and silence. Because some promises are eternal.